Is 105, so we're going to start as promised. The item that we're currently on is scholarship eligibility criteria. Our education director, Stephanie Sprecher, is going to lead us through this whenever she's ready.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. Today, I am going to be reviewing our higher education scholarship program, as Austin just mentioned. Specifically, we're going to discuss how the funding for these scholarships has morphed from a fair percentage of privately funded scholarships to now, which are nearly all tribally funded. We're going to discuss how this dynamic gives us the flexibility and opportunity now to change the process and administer the scholarships to best benefit our students. At the end, I'm going to propose a solution, which that solution we got done in advance is in that resolution RIS that you all have received, to ensure that this process is streamlined. And then also, each year we will be able to adjust and provide more scholarships to some other graduate level students and trade school students, which right now a majority of our scholarships are for undergraduate. So I'll start out by stating that since 1975, there have been about 20 resolutions that have done three different things. They've established scholarships with private donations. They've set strict criteria for these private scholarships. But then we also have tribally funded scholarships that have also had strict criteria established with the approval of some of these resolutions as well. I'm going to get into just really briefly and not too much in the weeds on the processing of these applications. So each year when the scholarships are processed, all of the criteria has to be taken into consideration, as all of it was approved, as I just mentioned, by board resolution. So as of right now and as we process them, there's no wiggle room for not following all of the strict criteria. So this makes the processing not so cut and dry. So every year, for every scholarship that's submitted, last year we had about 250 applications, a student file is created, and there's a thorough review, typically always with two sets of eyes, for checks and balances to take place. What we have to do is we have to ensure that every single criteria that they mark on their application is verified. Unfortunately, human error does occur on applications, and it's our job to ensure that this is all verified so students don't miss out on scholarship opportunities. And to give you kind of an example, because I think every year, this is my second year doing this, but I think a lot of people don't understand the amount of verifying and checking that goes into that, and why the processing can take a bit sometimes, especially with that volume of applications. So for example, with the current criteria, if a student marks a certain residency that they reside in Unit 4, we must verify that their address matches with their W-9, with J.D. Edwards, blood quantum. We do have the Lumsden Scholarship and another scholarship that requires a quarter blood, but the majority does not. But with this, we have to check with enrollment that they are in fact verified to be a quarter blood. We also must verify, sometimes students write on their applications, they're in a certain field of study. A lot of these scholarships, and I'm going to pull up the database in a second to kind of show you, require a certain field of study. And so we actually have to go to their transcript and verify that what they're saying is their actual course of study, because again, it's our responsibility to ensure that those that get the existing scholarships meet all of the required credentials.
Hey, Stephanie, I have a quick question before we go on any further. So in the packet that was provided to us, there's a page that says higher education scholarship names. So those are the private scholarships, correct?
They're not all private, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but those are the ones that have been established throughout the years that we found that were either tribally funded or privately funded.
So out of that list, which ones are still being funded by the families?
Right now, we only have one, the Lumsden, that is a scholarship that is still being funded, but that's not on that list because that's privately funded. Those are the list of those that are tribally funded now.
So I know I'm jumping ahead, but what's everyone's thoughts on these scholarships starting as private, and then the private families determining the criteria for them to be awarded, and then the families stop funding them, and then the onus being on the tribe to continue to fund them and to continue to ensure that the applicants meet the criteria that the family originally set out for? Because I mean, me personally, I give a scholarship every single year to my grandma Shirley Nolan. I give 1 to 2 scholarships per year. I pay for it out of pocket, and I handle that independently. I mean, I wouldn't put the tribe in a position where I'd say, hey, I'm going to fund this for X amount of years, but then it's on the tribe to pay for, and while the tribe pays for it, I'm going to set very specific criteria to determine who gets it. So that's just my take. I may be in the minority, but it's just my take. Aaron?
Go ahead. Elders first.
So I sat on the Community Foundation Board, and that's what they do, right? They have private donors, and they everything's tailored to what they're looking for the scholarship, and they accumulate revenues and interest that keep going back into the program, and they do a lot of scholarships, so that they have all the information in place, so it'd be beneficial, I think, because there's a lot of elders out there that want to do something with their money, right? And they don't have an avenue for us. We don't have an avenue for them to donate it to like a scholarship.
Aaron?
Before originally it was called the Bernard Bouchard Scholarship, but before the Tribal Golf Scholarship, I offered to donate $20,000 to set up a scholarship in Rosemary Gaskin's name, and the response was that the tribe doesn't accept private scholarships, so I donated it to the Community Foundation and then fundraised, so it's about $40,000 now, and we have, up to 2 scholarships a year. That's the best way to do it because we're never using the principal, we're just using the interest. But I think we only have 2 scholarships that were privately established, the Pamela Gershon and the Joseph K. Lumsden. I don't think there's any other ones. The Gershon one is a book scholarship, not a full-blown scholarship unless that changed.
There was another one that was privately funded, and it was the George Nolan.
Oh, privately funded?
It initially had a donation for that, and then a couple of years back, we brought it forward to the board to make it funded through the Golf Classic because they didn't have any funds left in the fund that was donated.
Oh, because I remember, because I brought that one forward, the George K. Nolan Judicial Scholarship as one of our self-sufficiency ones. So I don't know about a donation, but I'm glad they donated. But there's only 2 or maybe 3 then. And does the Nolan one have a blood quantum?
Let me pull it up here. I'm actually going to screen share this, and I can show.
I do have an issue with having scholarships distributed by us that are inconsistent with our membership criteria, because we have never had a blood quantum. And so having a scholarship that has that, so when's the last time the Lumsdens donated to the scholarships? Because I don't know that happens.
Bill, do you want to, I don't know the last time they donated, but I know the available amount in there, and it's interest, right, Bill?
Well, let me look and see if I can find when the last donation was.
So while Bill is looking for that information, so again, we have 23 scholarships listed by different individuals' names. So did all of those start off as private and then transition to
No,
be
not
tribal?
all of them. So as Aaron just stated, and Jessica, there's only a couple in there, the Gershon, and then what was the other one? The Nolan? Yep. And so the rest were all established in names of, but with tribally funded, just to honor their contributions to the tribe.
So it originated, we used to do, we would fundraise, and then we would have so many, originally they were Bernard Bouchard scholarships, but they became, we still have Bernard Bouchard scholarships.
Just one.
The majority of them became tribal scholarships, and then over the years, the board, each unit identified who they wanted to recognize, and they set criteria based on that. Like we got a Martha Miller social work one.
Yeah. I've pulled it up, actually. A few years ago, Jessica would know when, before my time here, Susan McCoy helped pull together this database that can show you the eligibility of each scholarship. So Aaron, to answer your question, the Hatch, it looks like the Hatch scholarship.
It's different than Lumsden.
Yep, but that one has a quarter blood quantum, so that was what I was looking for. And then the Lumsden at the end, which is privately funded, I think. Is that the only one? I believe that's quarter blood. But I'm kind of jumping ahead, and that's fine. It looks like we're on the right course here with this discussion. But what I'll show you here is just to kind of give you a feeling for, you'll see the highlighted, how specific some of this criteria is. So if you start at the Matson fisheries, it lays out undergraduate or graduate, but then as we go down, it has the name and the specific criteria. So as we're looking through each student file and verifying, you can see where this becomes very meticulous. So we don't need to go through every single one unless you have specific questions, but this is how it's been outlined in our process. And what we do is we create the student file, and then we place them and have to go through every single file and place them. One student could qualify for several of these scholarships based on the criteria. So for example, right now, the way it sits, we don't have a scholarship opportunity for a part-time graduate student, only full-time. And I have an issue with that as education director because we have a lot of non-traditional students, those with families, and I want to see everybody have fair opportunity. So the way that this is set up is our graduate level students currently existing with our current criteria have to be enrolled full-time. So unless anybody has any questions on this database, I'll kind of go through this as I don't want to go too quickly. I was going to go more in the process. It seems like I probably don't know, I don't want to go in the weeds there. But what I do want to highlight is the Lumsden right now, we had said this is the only existing privately funded scholarship. We do have a special needs scholarship that I do need to address separately. Currently, we administer 4 total special needs scholarships. With this comes proof of, we'll just go to the end here, documented physical or emotional disability. And my personal or professional opinion is that the education division, this is a great scholarship, but should not be administering this. I feel that possibly behavioral health or an area that's more well-versed and has the credentials to determine what a documented physical or emotional disability is should be doing this. Also with that, I have HIPAA concerns because we're having to have that proof, but I don't feel, and I'm not comfortable having to have that proof to give the scholarship. So that I wanted to talk about that because when we clean this criteria, if you all approve it, I don't want to lose sight of that. But we just need to have that discussion on possibly moving that administration somewhere else. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or.
Aaron?
So I think that you could administer it, the ministerial part of it, but then just hand it over for handling to, I think behavioral health would be the one, not ACFS, but behavioral health. Having them review it and then submit back their recommendations. And that way we can minimize who actually would see what the disability is. And the team members in behavioral health are bound by HIPAA.
I do want to know, to kind of go back, what that will do, and it's, if we're trying to get to the point where we're cleaning this up and streamlining the process, what we'll have to do, which is fine, we can do it if that's the direction the board wants to go, but then we still will have to be very meticulous on tracking those that mark that they have that, and then we're still going to have to take that time to go back and forth between behavioral health. So I just wanted to throw that out there too.
So one thing that would help, because I think you're doing it like a scatter plot approach right now, is when they apply for any of our scholarships. If we had like a simple form they fill out, either SurveyMonkey or Microsoft has forms, it's called Microsoft Forms, and ask a couple of basic questions. Are you looking for need-based or private scholarships? And then what areas are you looking for? Have them click those. Then that will establish a data set that you can go back to and look at and see and match people up with what they indicated on that. Because the one thing that in the past we haven't done very well that I think we should need to transcend is if we can help people find out what they're eligible for rather than expecting them to go and figure out what it is, because it's a maze, it's complicated.
Yeah.
But if all they would have to answer is like maybe 5 basic questions on a form, and then that would go to higher ed. Higher ed would then scan through those to see which ones they match up to, and then send them the applications for those respective scholarships.
And then, oh, sorry, Jess.
I just wanted to add on that. These 4 scholarships aren't, I guess, higher education scholarships. And I think that was one of our concerns as to why we wanted to move them to a different area. So it's not necessarily for higher education services. Because 2 of the scholarships are for under 18, 2 are for over 18, and obviously those that are under 18 are definitely not higher education. So that was our concern of, moving them out of higher education and potentially moving them over to health services, and potentially having health services fund them too. Could be an option with third-party revenue.
And it doesn't relate to like tuition or anything like that? So I think I remember we created it to be flexible, so they could use it for special education needs. So I think in that case, well, it's back and forth because education should understand IEPs,
Yeah.
and behavioral health, I don't think does at all, but, so I don't.
Another thing to take into consideration is that we're talking specifically on the eligibility criteria, but there's also the selection component, which is these are very competitive scholarships, and how we determine who gets scholarships is a judging of the essay submissions or whatever that year is required for written submissions. And for the special needs scholarship candidates are not required to submit an essay. So then we get into, like last year, we had 16 students apply for the special needs scholarship, and we were just lucky that they qualified for special needs and they had submitted essays for other scholarship opportunities. So we had something to go based off of, but I don't feel that that should be a requirement either necessarily for special needs. So.
Okay, Bill, would you like to add something to that?
I'd just like to point out that I did some digging into the JKL scholarship, and our records regretfully only go back to '92, and it looks like it was started before that. And there's a number of deposits here, but I cannot, excuse me, I cannot tell the detail of where they came from. They're odd amounts, but I can see that they've earned a lot of interest, and that in 2003 and 2004, Greektown Casino made deposits into this scholarship. 5,000 was the first one, and 10,000 was the second one. And since then, I don't see any deposits other than the interest.
So now I remember, it was depleted, and we salvaged it by voting at the Greektown Management Board level to donate money into the scholarship. So I don't think if it ever had contributions from the Lumsden family, I don't know that that's even true. So it ended up running out, and I think we were ashamed of that because we didn't have any money budgeted for it. We had to budget each year to do the Lumsden scholarship. So, of course, I think we should continue it, but I don't think, Lumsden family reviews the essays, I think Lori
They
does
do,
that.
yep, they receive everything as the other judges do for all the other scholarships, blind with all names off, and then they make their selection. We just give them the qualify based on their criteria.
Yeah.
So are any families listed here that aren't contributing financially to the scholarships? Are they in charge of selection?
Only the Lumsden is with theirs. Our higher education committee and those that judge are with all of the others,
Okay.
the essay. And then just to note, the Lumsden Scholarship was established in 1988 per resolution, just a side note. Can I proceed? Okay. So I just want to give an overview really quick. Last year, we had 58 total scholarships to Lumsden, but 58 tribally funded scholarships. Of those 58 scholarships, there were 47 available to undergraduate students and 5 that were available to only graduate level students. Let me kind of backtrack. We had 42 only for graduate. We had 5 that were a mixture of you could be a graduate or undergraduate, and then we had 5 that were graduate only. And then we only had 2 available for trade school students. So you can see, and I had it pulled up, but I took it down, how many undergraduate, almost all of our previously established scholarships are undergraduate, undergraduate, undergraduate. So we really want to look at the trends of things are changing now. We have more trade school students, graduate level students. So now if we have no more questions on the criteria and the way that we process that, I want to move forward into the solution, which is the resolution that you all have. And like I said, this will streamline the process and then give us the ability to offer scholarships to students based on application trends and needs. So you'll see on your resolution. Oh, Jess, did you grab mine? Or do I have it here? Sorry. Thanks. So what we are, or what I am proposing is that we have, we have the ability to, we're going to go to the attachment with the scholarship criteria. What I did is I looked at the trends based on all of our TED scholarship applicants as well as what was submitted last year for applications to come up with these numbers. So overall, for all of the TED scholarships, we've had a 3% rate for trade students submitting, and then last year we had about a 8% for scholarships in trade. So this year I'm proposing a 5% allocation for trade students, a 20% for graduate, and a 75% for undergraduate. I'm asking that in future years we have the ability to shift this based on application trends. So if we see that a lot of these undergraduates have graduated and they're going on to graduate school and we have, this is a hypothetical number, but 50-50, we're able to adjust that accordingly based on previous years and existing year, and that will help us a lot in this. I also attached the list of the names of the scholarships that we had mentioned previously. There's 23 total that we would continue to honor for their contributions to the tribe. So we would still honor those individuals as well, and we were asking to have that approved as well in this scholarship, or in this resolution. Typically, should I read right from the resolution here on any more of this? I think I've gone over the or the majority of it. If there's any questions, I'm just asking for approval. This will be on the July 1st agenda, and this will just make, what I'm trying to do is get this approved prior to the processing of the current academic year scholarship program, so it makes it a lot quicker, and students can get their scholarships earlier in the semester.
Okay, any final questions, comments? Mike?
Okay, with the Lumsden one, like, is that, how long is that slated to last at its current thing? Because is it something that we should just absorb now? Or is it something, hey, no, they have all these requirements, we're going to let it, since it's privately funded, we'll let that play its course out?
You want to go ahead? Yeah.
Significant amount of money in that account right now, so I don't think it would be a concern for quite some time.
Yeah, and they administer 2 a year, and they're, Bill, do you have any additional? Yeah, I don't.
The interest is more than the scholarships have been.
Okay.
So the principal has been increasing every year, Mike.
But it's not ours, it's a privately funded, or is it ours? If it's ours now, I guess I'm just not understanding why we wouldn't just absorb it and say, these are the new rules now, we're just going to be consistent, because I like your consistency stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm just not understanding why that one's solely all by itself, if it's our fund now, and we have, and I granted it was at one time
I would
privately funded, but it sounds like it might have been not so privately funded either. So I guess on just behalf of the tribe, I don't know why we wouldn't just absorb that now and just be consistent and say, these are our rules. And if we want anybody to, future ones too, hey, someone comes along and says, I want to donate to the scholarships, and say, here, this is what we do. If this is something you're interested in, because I think you're right, a lot of the legwork shouldn't have to be borne on you guys doing it. So I like the consistency. That's the one aspect I'm not understanding why we're not just absorbing it now.
No, I appreciate that. And if Bill, it is funded by us, if he's confirming that, then to me, that would not be an issue to
And then
amend
just
this.
include this name,
Yeah,
include the Lumsden name on here, and we're still honoring that.
exactly. Yeah, we could amend
intent
this and
of it.
add their name.
So
yeah.
we're funding it, so we would have the ability to change the criteria. Is anyone opposed to the criteria for this scholarship changing to align with the criteria for the others, as far as like blood quantum, things like that? Okay. And then this is a question for you, Bill. How much interest does that account accrue per year? Because if it's accruing more than we're dishing out in scholarships, then what are your thoughts on just giving out more scholarships or increasing the amount from $1,000 to something greater? Because I don't believe we've increased the amounts of our scholarships in quite a few years.
I guess I'd make a suggestion on that. If it is all tribal funds in that account right now, I would transfer those funds to the golf scholarship fund. That fund there has $1 million in it, and basically every year we have to distribute 5% of that fund, so I would just combine them into one if it technically is our dollars.
And as I mentioned earlier, we only have 58 last year that were tribally funded, and we had 250 applications, and these are highly competitive. Personally, I would like to be able to give out more scholarships than we currently can each year.
So, Bill, do you see an issue with those funds being absorbed into the golf scholarship funds?
No, I don't. In fact.
Would that be your recommendation as our interim CFO?
Yes.
Okay,
The,
do we need to take board action to do that, or is that something that we can do internally?
Would I amend this resolution
I don't know if it should be added to,
or separate?
I don't know if you need to identify it, that perhaps you have some other scholarships that you would do the same thing to.
Yep, we do have one other one, the Gershon Scholarship. That one was originally, the funds were donated by the family, and then that was depleted, and then Greektown also donated to that one. So that one, I believe, had around $13,000 in it, and we would look at transferring those funds over as well.
The Lumsden last year, to answer the question, generated $4,903 in interest, and as I mentioned earlier, distributed $2,000 in scholarships. So that would add to the golf scholarship account, and then you would have the 5% there that you would issue. So I think you're accomplishing the same thing. Based on this balance, you would give out 5 more scholarships.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, more scholarships, the better. We have so many students that are trying to go to school. It's so expensive, and I know $1,000, isn't a tremendous amount of money, but every little bit helps.
Exactly.
So, okay, Aaron?
The only thing I would caution us is, I think we should do this. It cleans it all up, it makes it easier. But if individual donors want to donate the way they want to donate, that we accept, especially if it's significant amounts, accept those private scholarships to assist them, because one person who did that to just this phenomenal level was Noah Lesk. And I talked with him at, whenever they came in here, and I said, hey, by the way, I see you're back, what about scholarships? And he said he was going to think about it. So he might come back around. And what he did, if you remember, they were called the Noah T. Lesk scholarships. And they were basically, he donated the money and they were just direct scholarships. It wasn't the interest. It'd be nice if we could convince him to let us put it in the principal and then just use the interest, but I'm not sure he's going to do it that way. Because he wants a big hit. He did 40 scholarships one year.
Yeah, I will say, soon I'll be coming forward with a scholarship from somebody who wanted to remain anonymous to set up a scholarship for Les Ruditis. And so I'm working on that right now to establish that scholarship. But I'm glad we're having this conversation first, because if that's privately funded and they would like us to help, they will still, he wants to set, this donor, his own criteria, and the essay question specific to, Les and his honors. So he can review those scholarships and choose. But yeah, I do have questions from people who are interested in donating still privately, but I'm also trying to be cognizant of the fact that we're trying to streamline this process, so I don't want to, we are welcome and want those scholarships, but we have to find a way where we can process them together and streamline it. So, okay, so I will amend to add the Lumsden name to the scholarship name list as on the attachment. Other than that, is there any other?
Jess, you're going to add the Gershon one as well?
Yes, we'll add that wording to the resolution, the Gershon and the Lumsden dollars being transferred over.
Okay, anything else to go over, Steph?
No, I appreciate it. I think this is the first step towards really cleaning up these programs and making things much more efficient, and also being realistic with the times of the trends of how people are going to college today, more graduate and trade school students, and letting us have that ability to offer more. So I just thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you so much.
Oh,
Aaron.
Bridget has, sorry.
I just want to say thank you for having your eye on the ball on these consultations. The last one that you guys submitted was perfect. So
Thanks.
we're leading, the tribe's leading again in education, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Bridget.
Yeah, Steph, I just want to say I appreciate you putting in the work for this. I know this has been an issue the last several years where, I had wanted, I'm sure everybody did, that the scholarship recipients could get it before they went to school in the fall, so they know exactly what they have to pay out of pocket or what situation they're in. So I appreciate you streamlining it and taking the time to do it. And I've always been about the trades as well, and then looking at part-time, because you're right, there's a lot of people that may have to work, they're single parents or whatever their situation is. So as many as we can provide in as many different categories with, the streamline, I think that's a great idea. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Aaron.
So I just want to be careful. It's been happenstance that we haven't been able to give scholarships out before the beginning of the year, but long ago, the Higher Ed Committee talked about this, is what universities were doing is they were building our financial aid, tribal financial aid, in the students' financial aid package, and they were discounting and disqualifying them for need-based aid at universities.
For grants.
So the benefit of us not being timely is that it doesn't get put into their financial aid package, and then they don't have to report it in their total financial aid. Because universities will subtract, like if we're going to give $2,000 scholarship, they'll subtract that from the student's financial aid package, and they won't get that from Pell Grant, or they won't get it from student loans. So I think, I support what Bridget's saying, but I think like maybe if it's like second week in September after school started and they already got the financial aid package, that way they can't discount it and reduce their award. So
It'll go against their cost of attendance.
well, it does.
Mike.
Just to put a seed down, I love that we got all the names on here, but like at some point in the future, not now, because I know everybody's busy right now, but maybe a little blurb on each one of these people's and saying the contributions they did for the tribe and all that, because I think that, would be helpful years down the road too, that we remember why these scholarships are there and why, why we're honoring these people. And also on that, we could thank previous donators and have a little how to donate button, because I think that would be a good way to be able to entice people to donate too.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because what I would like to do, I know we used to do, Jess can maybe correct me here, but we used to do more like newspaper coverage and, thank you and those type of things, and the scholarships and announcing, and so maybe get back into that, and so when we honor that name, what their, contributions were at that point, because I totally agree. So, again, I just want to say thank you. This is going to make this semester so much easier for processing, so we'll have to do the essay scoring, but it'll make it a lot easier and going forward.
All right, we appreciate it.
Yep. All right, thank you.
Stephanie. All right, so the next item, the legal department wants to speak to us, so we're going to do a closed session there, and then we will be back with the scheduled agenda for Sioux Tribe Housing Authority consultant for low-income housing tax credits. So we'll go close for just a moment.
Started or?
Echo.
I'm not that quick at it.
So good afternoon. This afternoon, we have a presentation from RT Hawk. We have executed a contract with them to assist the Housing Authority making application for low-income housing tax credits. So this afternoon, we have Lorna Fogg here from RT Hawk, and we have Bridget Corse here from Bo Simone Consulting, and they're going to give us an overview of tax credits and what we're looking to do with permanent supportive housing. So I will turn it, and we also have a housing commissioner, Annie Thiebert. We have our grant specialist, Crystal Brownlee. Of course, you know me.
Are you Brenda's child?
Yeah, maybe.
Holy cow.
We've gotten that a few times today.
Yeah. You went to
Welcome
JKL.
back, Jen.
Good to see you again.
You as well.
And Maria Mangine, the assistant director. So I will turn it over to Lorna and Bridget.
Okay, we'll introduce ourselves, and then I'll go first, and then Bridget can go, and she's going to have the beginning of the presentation anyhow. So I work for a company called RT Hawk Housing. We are 100% owned by a gentleman named Wilbur Red Tomahawk. He is a member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, nation. And we work primarily in the low-income housing tax credit field, and then accompanying programs that go with that. So any type of money that needs to come into the project, we can help with the layering of those funds. Either we would be helping with that, or we would be relying on your grant writers to work on that, and we can assist with those types of things. I've been doing this since 1995, so I've been around for a while. I know I don't look like I possibly could have been doing it that long, but so I've been doing it a long time, and at the beginning of my years, working with tribes, trying to tell them about the program, a lot of it was, this is what's supposed to happen, this is what we could possibly do. These are the types of things we can do. It was a little bit harder back then because it hadn't been done before, but now, all these years later, it's been done hundreds and hundreds of times by many different tribes. So my job has gotten a lot easier as time has gone on. But that's a little bit about me, and then I'll have Bridget introduce herself.
So hello, it's nice to be back again. I think I met a number of you back in October of last year. I was assisting the team at Housing and applying for a HUD grant. I am working with Sioux Housing Authority in two ways. Number one, I am a technical assistance provider with the National American Indian Housing Council. So a technical assistance request goes in from a housing authority or a tribe. It's for supportive housing. Our team at Bo Simone gets assigned to that. And number two, we're also under contract with the state of Michigan to provide technical assistance to the tribes throughout Michigan. And a lot of the stuff that's come out of that, one of the big things is some changes to the qualified allocation plan in the state of Michigan that helps tribes and TDHEs become more competitive in the process. So I can't take any credit for that. That was led by two really brilliant Native female attorneys who weren't afraid to kind of, make suggestions and give feedback to the state. So I'm also working in that area as well. I come to the table with over 20 years of experience working in affordable housing. A lot of that work was with nonprofits and housing agencies. I've been working as a consultant full-time for the last 4 years, and prior to that, been doing some part-time work with tribes and TDHEs across the country. We have worked on projects like this from Ketchikan, Alaska, all the way to St. Regis Mohawk Nation in northern New York. So we have a lot of experience in various states and experience working with Lorna's team as well. So thank you for having me back again.
You got
The slide?
Yep.
Okay, so I've given the training to a lot of the members of the Housing Authority on permanent supportive housing in the past. And so how many here are familiar with it so I can kind of gauge? Okay, so I'm going to start at the top then, and I'm going to try to give a very abbreviated overview of what supportive housing is. Typically, when we do the training, it can be 1 or 2 days about the model that we don't have time for today. So you all have this wonderful success with the development and opening of the Lodge of Hope. And our team was involved a little bit in that during the planning phase and implementation phase of that project. That's a profoundly successful program, right? Like taking some time and some effort and resources to invest in the people who are most vulnerable in your community. And so what happens for us is when we're talking with Joni, who works at the Housing Authority, is her team starting to think, all right, how do we support people who might need the Lodge of Hope, or people who are doubled up and overcrowded and not in ideal situations, who are tribal members? How do we develop housing so that there's a next step, right? We shelter people or we give them short-term housing subsidies, and there's not always the next step. And so that's kind of the world I come from in the supportive housing realm, is that I worked at a housing agency for many years. I would work with people who had very severe disabilities, whether it was developmental or mental health disabilities. They would be experiencing homelessness. I would then help get them a housing voucher and move them into a unit with a private landlord. And before 2 or 3 months was up, they were being evicted. And why were they being evicted? Because they had so many barriers related to their mental health or their physical health. And number 2, they had never been housed. A lot of the folks that we worked with grew up in homelessness, right? So they didn't even really have a concept of how to be a good neighbor, or follow a lease, or manage a budget. So that really got me interested in the supportive housing model. So across the country, supportive housing has been recognized in every state and federally as a best practice to addressing and ending homelessness, number 1. And number 2, it is also prioritized by states when they're allocating funding through the low-income housing tax credit competition, and when states are awarding housing choice vouchers to programs that provide essential housing subsidies to operate these programs. Supportive housing is housing just like the Housing Authority does every day with a lease. People sign a lease. They have obligations, rights, and responsibilities just like you or I would as a tenant, and they are held accountable to those rights and responsibilities. At the same time, we're adding service providers to the mix, service providers who work on site. So sometimes the service providers are the service providers that you already have here working with the tribe, right? You have a very successful health center. You have a behavioral health program. You have ACFS that does an amazing job working with the Lodge of Hope. So you have a lot of tribal resources that already are available to a lot of the people who would be moving in to a supportive housing project. So we're pairing the services with highly subsidized housing. So we're going to go after the funding, right, to build this brand new building. And we're going to get it. Building the units is easy. It's the ongoing operations and upkeep of the units. Well, building's not easy, but getting the money to build can be. The area that we struggle with, right, is subsidizing the operating of these units. And we are moving in people who are living on low to no income, right? So they don't have money to pay rent. So we need to subsidize the rents for these folks. And that's where the operating subsidy comes in that we will go after for this project. That is almost always how we design supportive housing projects across the country. We also design them so that they are a single site apartment building. And why is that? Well, the reason is one of the biggest things that gets people kicked out of housing after they've moved in is it's really difficult for them to not move in many other people. And this is not necessarily 100% on them because people don't want to turn their backs on relatives who are in need and need a place to stay. People don't want to turn their back on people when they've been homeless for 9-10 years and that person gave them a place to stay. So by doing the single site, single point of entry, we help give that person a buffer. We help them learn how to establish boundaries with people. But more importantly, we're also able to design common space in the center part of the building where people come and go. And that common space becomes a really essential piece of the supportive housing model where all of the service providers can come and have office space on that first floor. So you might have the clinic actually have an office where they can send a visiting nurse weekly to check on people or to give immunization clinics, or a therapist who comes 2 afternoons a week who can take people for appointments when we know a lot of these folks might struggle with getting to the services they need to get to. Many of those services are Medicaid billable, especially in the state of Michigan, has established funding through Medicaid billing, as long as we have the infrastructure to do it, which I know Sioux Tribe does. You can bill Medicaid for a lot of the services that happen within supportive housing on site. The other thing that we do when we build these single site buildings with a single point of entry is we want to lay our eyes on people, right? Especially when we're thinking about somebody that lives alone, or families with small children who are in the process of reunification, or we're trying desperately to keep these families unified. We want to lay eyes on these folks every day because that single person, we want to make sure that they're okay. We want to make sure we see them, that they're not alone in their apartment and struggling. With the families, we want to see that those kiddos came downstairs and got on the bus and went to school every day, right? So there's some really effective engagement that we can have with the people who live in the building. And all of that type of engagement ends up reducing the chances of them being evicted. And so the service providers that will work on site will work in collaboration with the housing authority's property management. Now, the housing authority already is amazing at trying to avoid eviction for people as much as possible. They will always take every step possible to avoid that eviction. We're asking that that also happen in supportive housing, but in a very targeted and intentional way, often involving the service provider. So when I was a young case manager working with people who were coming out of homelessness and moving in their house, I might knock on their door for a home visit and they wake up after being asleep all day because depression or anxiety or whatever, and I knew they were about to get kicked out because their house was a mess. So I might go in for a home visit and help them start trying to organize their cleaning schedule, help them obtain the items they need to clean the unit, like garbage bags or whatever, and really start helping them build the skills that they need to keep house in the way they need to. Next slide. So it's not time limited, and I go into communities all the time to talk about this. When I got out of college a million years ago, I was part of a case management system that would sit down and say, you have 2 years to get your act together. We're going to get you out of homelessness. We're going to get you off the streets. We're going to give you a place to live. You have 2 years. If you don't have all your ducks in a row in 2 years and follow this plan, then too bad. Well, that would work for some people who have like high levels of skills, right? So it works really well sometimes with domestic violence survivors who really just need the help to kind of recover and start again. But when we're talking about people who have a lifetime of trauma, who have developmental disabilities, mental health disabilities, and some serious substance use disorders, that can take longer. And then when we look at the aging of the homeless population, the majority of the individuals who experience chronic homelessness are in their 50s and older. And so it's quite difficult to change that pattern for somebody who is that age. So some of the people will stay for a year and be ready to move on. Some of the people will take 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And some of the people, they will be on hospice care and Meals on Wheels and end-of-life care for the rest of their life in this apartment building. And they will die in a dignified, supportive place, right? So the other thing I'd say about time limited is no affordable housing. All affordable housing is not time limited. As long as you qualify to go to the housing authority and apply for housing, you get affordable housing. So we also look at it in that way, right? As long as somebody financially qualifies, they get affordable housing. I talked about the subsidies already. I'm sorry, I'm going out of order, but I wanted to set the stage for you all. So the industry standard is people pay 30% of their income. So if somebody moves into this building and they have zero income, they're going to pay zero in rent. But what is the service staff on site going to do? They're going to try to help them apply for any benefits that they're eligible for. They're going to try to help them build skills around employment, look for employment, work to the best of their abilities. And for some people, that might not be full-time. But we're always trying to build those resources and those skill sets for people. And so eventually, they'll be contributing. The remainder of their rent will be subsidized by the housing voucher that is awarded in conjunction with the project. It's independent living, so we're not trying to be a treatment center, we're not trying to be a nursing home, we're not trying to be a transitional housing or a shelter. People really are independent adults who sign a lease. But that doesn't mean that we don't provide services that are aimed at helping people access recovery, that are aimed at helping people move on from this housing option, because we know there'll be more people after them that need that. So as much as we can help build people's skills around housing, they might get on the regular housing authority wait list and 2, 3, 4 years from now be ready to move into a traditional rental with the housing authority. So we're always going to be trying to build people's skills to move on, but also recognizing that some of them may not. So really, this project is meant to support people in working on addressing their trauma. A lot of the issues that we see people face are related to a lifetime of trauma. So we're trying to help people recover. These projects serve all different populations. So in a larger city, we might focus on one specific population. In this project, we are going to build 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms, right? So we're going to have multi-generational living. We're going to have older folks move in, people with disabilities move in. We're going to have families move in, because this isn't a big city, right? We're not going to just focus on one population when we know the need is across the board. Slide. Okay, next slide. And so I guess in ending, I would just say that with supportive housing, we also are asked by our funders on the state and federal level to utilize what's called a housing first approach. And the housing first approach simply is that people deserve housing as a right, and that we are going to meet people where they are at. We're still going to hold them accountable as tenants, but we're going to meet them where they're at. We're going to try to help them trust us, connect with us, be engaged with our services, feel part of a community by having events, meals, cultural events, and all of that common space. We're going to meet them where they're at so that they can trust us and engage with us enough to address all of those issues rooted in trauma that are holding them back, that are continuing the cycle of homelessness for them. And the hope is that they move on to more independent housing. That's good. Next slide. Okay. So any questions about the supportive housing model, first and foremost, that anyone wants to ask? Okay. So what that brings me to is, in our time engaged with the Housing Authority and other folks here, and participating in this Michigan Tribal Housing, or Tribal Nations toolkit, we have started to put what's called a concept plan in place. With Joni and her team, we have started to develop a concept plan. Where should it be built? How many units? Who should be the partners? What funding sources can we go after? So I was here back in October. We were working on an application. I was just assisting, they did it, assisting with an application to HUD for the Continuum of Care Builds grant. It was a one-time funding from HUD's Continuum of Care program that typically funds services. It was a one-time opportunity to actually apply for capital. And it was the first time in the Continuum of Care competition that I had seen very specific language about serving tribes that made me quite optimistic about the ability to obtain this funding. So one of the things is that you could apply for up to $9 million in the balance of state here in Michigan. However, if you're going to build on trust land, that amount increased to $11 million. There were 3 awards guaranteed nationally to tribes or TDHEs, and so this funding could be used as capital to build. We also knew at the same time that we also had to start working with a development consultant who was skilled at going after and applying for low-income housing tax credits, and that's where our T-Hawk comes in. So we've been working on this project little by little. The COC grant went in November of '24. In April of '25, the new administration, we had an election in the United States, so some things changed. And so we were made aware that HUD, throughout that old competition, they were no longer good. They call it voided the applications. They re-released the notice of funding availability with some changes, not big changes, but some changes, and require that we resubmit the grant. That grant's due at the end of this week, and we are resubmitting the grant to HUD for $11 million. We should know an answer about that award at the end of summer. That doesn't mean that we sit back and assume that we're going to get that $11 million. We need to be also working with our LIHTC development consultant to start putting together an application. That application is going to require some collaboration with the Housing Authority in order to score high enough to be awarded funding, and also to have a really high-quality program there. So 2 areas that we will need collaboration and cooperation is Medicaid billing. So with the Tribal Health Clinic, we're going to need some support around Medicaid billing and service provision. Not whether it be on-site or off-site, we need to have some collaborative planning in the form of an MOU that will go in with the low-income housing tax credit application, basically stating that we serve Sioux tribal members who have these behavioral, physical health needs, and we have the ability to bill Medicaid. The other thing is that Michigan has added categories that you can bill. I'm not the wizard at Medicaid billing, but they've added billing categories that are directly related to supportive housing. So it's quite possible that there could be staff on site providing supportive services such as case management, not just clinical services, that could be reimbursable by Medicaid. So that's why they're looking for that kind of very close collaboration and support between departments underneath the tribe. So that's going to be a really important thing in the next 3-4 months as we're putting this application together, that I can have some time to work with somebody from that department, and Sierra and Crystal can work with them to start developing a really strong services plan, strong MOU that's going to get this project awarded, and eventually, when the project's built in 2 or 3, 4 years, a really strong program for the folks that move in.
So I love that. I wish Lana were here today to hear this, because this is something that's been on her agenda for all while she's been on the board. We don't currently do that. We do have a medical social worker. We do have community health. We do have, what are they called? They used to be called health aides. We have all of that in place, but we don't. We have elder services that is something like that, and chore services, but we don't do case management that way.
Right.
So I think this gives us a chance to, are they going to have to package it that way to say that they will commit to that, or just whatever resources we do avail now, we will avail?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to state what services are available to all tribal members in this community currently now. It can be designed, I mean, the reason that there needs to be a lot of planning is that we can ultimately design it any way we want. We just have to hit the core concepts of what the state's looking for in the funding process. So there's times where, you know, the TDHE might have like a master site coordinator who's really basically interfacing with all of the service providers, being that conduit to make sure the services are happening in the building. But number two, that person who's doing the work in the building under the TDHE also knows the housing status of every single resident. Like Bridget's going to get evicted, and this, you know, Lorna's a hoarder, you know, like all that kind of stuff, right? So there's going to be somebody on site. You could design it that way. Or, you know, we had the director of ACFS with us this morning, super big advocate for this type of project, super, you know, involved in the Lodge of Hope. She might say, don't worry about it, Choni, I got it. I know exactly what I could do. What do you think? And there'd be a negotiation, right? Because you're wanting to have services that are specialized in housing stability, but also services that are clinical and resource related. A lot of times, especially with families who have open cases, there's going to need to be a lot of support for those families in making sure that they're compliant with whatever those case management plans are. So it can be designed in any way. It just requires that everybody sit down at the table and honestly say, here's the piece I can do, here's the piece I can do, here's where our limitations are, and we just negotiate a structure that's going to be acceptable to the state. The state's also going to be very aware that you're a sovereign nation and give us a little bit more leeway about how we implement those. But we just have to come up with a plan and a story and a workable idea of how we can implement this program once it's built in 2 or 3 years.
I think it's a great thing.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for listening, and I'm going to be around for a long time because I'm not going to give up until they give up, but they're not going to give up, so thank you.
Okay, now for the boring stuff, which is, I get excited about money. I don't know about everybody else, but, and I just want to be cognizant of your time. So how much time do we have here?
Oh, 3:30.
Okay, that should be plenty of time. That'll just tell me whether or not I need to go very, very fast or how it works. But how many of you have heard of the low-income housing tax credit program? Yeah, quite a few, quite a few. Okay, well, that's great. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. You can interrupt me with questions, or you can ask me the questions at the end. And so, like I said, I've been doing this since 1995. Actually, this was my first job out of college. I went in for my interview, and they said, "What can you do?" And I said, "Well, I was a waitress, so I could hold 6 beer mugs in each hand. That was my skill." And somehow, I managed to get into this department. Prerequisite there. Anyhow, so this program's been around since 1986, and it's an IRS program. Oftentimes, that sounds kind of scary, because you're used to dealing with more like HUD programs. But what happened was the old HUD funding programs for housing, they didn't work as well for the long term. You know, the government, the federal government shouldn't be managing housing in various states. There was no oversight on the management and the maintenance of the units, those types of things. So they came up with this program to help privatize affordable housing. And they came up with a public-private partnership in which the federal government still is throwing money at the program, but they're allocating the money through the state agencies, and then the state agencies are bringing money to the projects through this program. So the low-income housing tax credit program generates tax credits for investors, and the investors are typically institutional investors. Back in the early days, they used to be individuals, but now they're large corporations, Google, Berkshire Hathaway, they're insurance companies, they're banks, they're just have a lot of tax liability. So the tax credits are a dollar-for-dollar reduction in tax liability, not a deduction. A deduction is actually only as good as whatever tax bracket you're in. And they do require a partnership structure, which we'll get into in a moment. So I know we're talking about the supportive housing project that we're working on putting an application in, but just for your knowledge, you can do new construction, single-family apartments, you can do rehab, acquisition rehab, you can do rent-to-own. It has to be rental for 15 years, and then it can turn into home ownership. So there's a lot of things that can be done with this program. The tax credit program is a permanent part of the tax code, and it's liked by Republicans and Democrats. And every time there's some kind of market uncertainty, elections and stuff like that, they do try and put a patch on the program. So right now they've got something in where they're trying to give additional tax credits, like a 12% increase that's involved in this big, beautiful bill thing. Whether or not that passes, I don't know, but they do want to expand it because costs have gone up. There's less, tax credits don't go as far as they used to, so they're trying to put some more supply out there. When we talk about tax credits, we're talking about a big dollar amount. If I say you're getting $1 million worth of tax credits, it's actually going to be for 10 years. So $1 million times 10, that's a $10 million amount that you're getting. They have a 15-year compliance period. That's your recapture period. That's where if you did something wrong, that they could take that allocation back and you'd have to pay the money back. However, and as long as I've been doing this and working with tribes, we've never had a dollar taken back. There's, whatever the risks are, there's ways to mitigate those risks. The majority of tax credits that are recaptured are usually for-profit developers that have large loans and they can't pay their debt and they get foreclosed upon. That's the biggest reason for recapture. But that's not the way we structure the projects for tribal housing. So this is just an old tax form that kind of gives you an idea of what a tax credit is. On the first page of the tax form, you talk about how much income you make. Let's say you made $100,000 in all your income. You flip it over. This is the back side of the tax form. You would say, I make $100,000. Then you would take off your deductions and exemptions. And at that point, maybe you only make $75,000. That's your taxable income. At that point, you figure out how many taxes you owe, and assuming you're in a 33% tax bracket, you would owe $25,000 in taxes. And then if you look down towards the bottom of the form, it's probably kind of small for you, it talks about tax credits. So you take from your taxes that you owe, these tax credits. And the reason for this form is just to show you how familiar these tax credits are. We're talking about housing tax credits, but there are so many others: the child tax credit, education credits, dependent tax credits. There's been first-time homeowner tax credits, earned income tax credits. These things have been around for a long time. It's just not what we're talking about today, but a tax credit in general works the same way. So if you had $5,000 worth of tax credits, instead of owing that $25,000, you would only owe $20,000. Or if you paid your $25,000, you'd get a $5,000 return. Any questions about that? No. So you have to apply through the state agency, which is MSHDA. It's a federal program. And it's only, you only apply through the state because that's where the federal government puts the credits. Each state gets to determine the competition and what the needs are for their area. So we apply through Michigan State Housing Development Authority. And typically, you would get about 80% of your project covered through the tax credit program. And I say typically because it just really depends on where you're located, what the definition of a project is, and limitations within the program. You have income and rent restrictions. The federal rule requires no more than 60% of area median income for your rent and income restrictions. But the state agency may have tougher requirements for the competition. I think in Michigan, we can do most of the units at 60% if you have vouchers and stuff like that. They do allow for this new thing, which is called income averaging, where instead of everything having to be at 60% or below, you can have some at 80%. But for every 80% unit, you need to have a 40% unit, and you average 60%. Your incomes have to be moved in, certified at move-in, but then you could come to the casino, win a lot of money, become a millionaire, and you can stay in your unit. Now, if the tribe has a policy or the housing authority has a policy where they don't want millionaires living in their unit, then that's up to you to determine whether or not they can stay. But the program allows them to stay. You have to include per cap from gaming, and the first $2,000 in per cap generated from trust assets is excluded in the income calculation. There's a 15-year mandatory compliance period. Even though it's a 10-year credit, that 15-year matches that recapture period. And if it's a rental, a permanent rental, then it needs to also have a 15-year extended use requirement. And the competition also requires a little bit longer than that. And all that means is if somebody moves out, then the next person that moves in has to qualify. And that's what you do with all of your current housing at the moment. If somebody moves out, you have to certify as they move in under the income restrictions. And as I mentioned before, the project can be either a permanent rental, which in this case supportive housing absolutely would be, or if you did a single-family home project and you wanted it to be home ownership, you could certainly do that after the first 15 years. So we had mentioned that you have to compete through your state allocating agency. There's a lot less tax credits to be had than there are people that want them. It's a very competitive program. Once you receive those tax credits, they're useless to you as a tribe, but there are lots of investors out there that want them, and it's a mature market, and we help match the investor and the housing authority up so that you have somebody that's going to be purchasing these credits. Even though they get their benefits over a 10-year period, they're actually going to give you that money during construction so that you can build your project. They're going to give that to you up front based on construction draws, and then they're going to get their benefit each year for the next 10 years. They do have to stay with you for 15. That last 5 years will be depreciation and operating losses that they'll also get. It allows the housing authority to build with a limited amount of their own money or tribal funds, and it allows for more units for less money and more units in less time. So instead of taking that $500,000 that you might have sitting around and building 2 units, next year you get another $500,000, build another couple units, it allows you to take that $500,000 and build 20 units right now. So your credits are initially awarded based on the lower of the cost caps or the estimated construction costs. And I'll show you what that means in Michigan here in a bit. And then they reevaluate them. So you're never going to get more than the amount that they reserved for you. So if your costs go up, you're still stuck at that lower number. So we have to be pretty accurate when we're going in. But there are also cost caps, so we can't go over those anyhow. So you're kind of stuck in this one spot. When I go over the numbers, you'll see a 9% credit and a 4% credit. Actually, we're not going to do a 4% credit today. We're just going to do 9%. And that is your new construction or your rehabilitation costs are all going to be 9%. If we were going to do 4%, that would be if you were going to acquire units, or if you wanted to do the non-competitive bond project, you would basically get less than half of the credits. So we're going to work towards a 9% application, and if for whatever reason we have to restructure it, if we weren't competitive or we needed less money, then we would go after the 4%. So the amount that the tribe or the housing authority has to come up with is basically going to be how much does the project cost to build, and what's the investor going to give us for those tax credits. That's your gap. Right now, the market is pretty low. It's very low compared to where we were just a year ago. We're around 73 to 76 cents on the dollar. And you might say, I thought a tax credit was worth $1. How come now you're saying it's only worth 73 or 76 cents? And that's because the investor is not in the business of just building housing for poor people, right? They're in the business of making money, getting a yield on their money, and they also have the time value of money. They're giving you the money now, but they're getting their benefits over the next 10 to 15 years. So they want a yield. They can invest their money in many locations. They can put it in the bank and maybe earn 5%, or they can do this project, which is a little bit more riskier, and they're going to want a better yield for that. And then the tribal loan, we call it the tribal loan, but it's a gap loan, basically. It can consist of NAHASDA or other tribal funds or other gap sources. So that bottom bullet point, there's the Affordable Housing Program grants that we can apply for, and there's up to $3 million available with that. It goes very well with tax credit programs. It has a very similar compliance periods. ICDBG, the IHBG Competitive, Home, Rural Development, Indian Health Services, BIA, any of those types of agencies that have the continuum of care build, any of those things that have money that could go towards this project, that would be going towards your gap in the project. And ideally, your gap gets down to little to no money. And we've been able to do that, not all the time. It really just depends on location. But I just got back from a grand opening in Washington State where they built 30 units and they had no money in the project. We funded it completely with grants and tax credits. So it can be done. Oh, I forgot about the developer's fee. So this program is, I don't know why I'm leaning this way. I'm going to sit up straight. It's like I'm going towards, I'm going to go like this. My posture will be better. Yeah. So a developer's fee. The program, again, the tax credit program attracts for-profit developers, nonprofit developers, and tribal developers. And as part of putting the project together, you get to earn a developer's fee. And the developer's fee is typically about 15% of the project costs. And that's why it's a competitive program, because there's a lot of these for-profit people that want to keep making money, and this is a very lucrative career for them. And they're competing against you and trying to put their projects in certain locations to where they're going to get more points than anybody else. But the way our model works is we're a consultant, you're the developer, and you get the developer's fee. This is a part of the calculation. If you're in a qualified census tract or a difficult to develop area, you get a boost. So even if we say your project is going to cost $10 million, we get to say your project costs $13 million and then do the formula based on that. And your project would be eligible for the boost. So going back to that partnership, because it's an IRS program and the benefits and burdens of the project or the finances go with the ownership of the project. Therefore, the investor, which is a limited partner, will own 99.99% interest in the partnership. You will be the general partner, you're the managing partner, and you earn a 0.01% interest. Now, this is for the compliance period, which is that 15-year period. Once you get through the 15th year, the investor has no reason. They actually would prefer to get out after the tax credits are gone, but they stay in through the 15th year because of the recapture period. And actually, some of them are getting out a little bit earlier now. But once you get to that 15-year, the investor will basically walk away from the project and 100% reverts back to the tribe or the housing authority. And again, when I said I was doing this up front, and I would say, in 15 years, this is what's supposed to happen. And tribes didn't start working with the tax credit program till about the late 1990s, 2000. So when I was doing this in 2000, I had no idea what actually was going to happen. I just knew what was supposed to happen. And since that time, about 2013 on, 15 years have come and gone many, many times over. And what happens is the investor will exit the partnership. They've exited every single partnership I've ever been involved in, and they would exit this partnership as well. There's a little bit of a fee for legal documents, probably $10,000, depending on which investor you work with. And then they go their way, and 100% of the project reverts to the tribe or the housing authority. Any questions on that?
Anybody have any questions? I don't see any.
Okay. Well, and a lot of times people say, well, I'd like to own 50% or 51% and let the investor own 49%. Because I want to have a majority. And you could do that. But if the investor was going to give you $10 million for the 99.99, and you only want them to have 50%, they're only going to give you $5 million. And you're going to have 50% of the tax credits, and those tax credits are going to be worthless and lost. So that's why the structure is like that. So the good news is the limited partner has limited liability. They have limited ability to direct. There will be, when you close the project, there will be a limited partnership agreement, and there will be exhibits to that limited partnership agreement, which is all your due diligence that will be going through. And so as long as you're in compliance with that agreement, and I would say 90% of that partnership agreement is going to be legal stuff. What happens if a dispute, what happens if this, that. And 10% of that is going to be kind of what you need to be able to, what you need to do. You need to report at this time. This is how you get your money, making sure that you're moving in the correct tenants to make sure the tax credits start flowing and so forth. So there's not a whole lot of what needs to happen. But as long as you're doing what you said you would do from the partnership, the limited partner should remain pretty silent. They should just be collecting information. The limited partner only provides money for development, for building the project. They do not help with the operations. They leave it up to you to determine how best to operate your projects. And ideally, we'll be getting those vouchers to help with that side of things too. They will visit the property on an annual basis to make sure you're in compliance with the program. And as I said, they collect some documents, some reporting. The tribal entity, that's you. You would be the general partner, the managing partner, the decision maker. You will be dependent on the day-to-day operations. You can rely on other people to do that. You can rely on tenants to do certain things. I don't know about in a supportive housing project, probably not. But in general, sometimes you are relying on your tenants to mow grass or do whatever. But ultimately, you're responsible to make sure that project keeps working. You're also going to be providing money for development, whether it's pre-development or filling the gap. But again, remember that we're going to be trying to fill that gap with these other programs as well. And then if, for whatever reason, there's an operational deficit, that's something that's going to have to be paid for by the tribal entity. And you're the ones that are going to be submitting the quarterly and annual reports and staying in compliance with the program. So the investor is willing to invest, but they have to consider their risk and their return. They do provide the money for the development phase up front, but they receive their return over the 15 years. The end investor has to make sure they have a sizable tax liability because they're going to be getting a big chunk of tax credits over the next 10 years. And they are going to be depending on the capacity of the general partner to perform and comply with the program. And they're going to depend on guarantees from the tribe to alleviate any risk. And I say tribe, housing authority. So what are our strategies? Trying to get as much money as we can that doesn't have to be paid back, and we do that with grants and equity. Of course, it has to make sense. You don't want to go after everything if it doesn't make sense, but if it makes sense for your project, then we should be going after as much as we can. Making sure that the funding is available, like this Continuum of Care build program, that's the first time this funding has been available, so that's wonderful. And just determining what's out there. And then what are the compliance requirements? That could be another day of talking about this stuff. And we have someone on that works for our company on the other side where she helps with the compliance and making sure everybody's up to date on everything that needs to happen there. How competitive are the programs we're going after? And then how much is the gap? What are we starting with on the gap? And then what do we hope to accomplish with these other programs to reduce that? And then pre-development, there's always going to be money that has to be spent in order to get to where we need to go. Already you have received a pre-development funding, a small amount, but already you've got me under contract. We're working, we'll be doing market studies, environmentals, eventually architectural drawings and stuff, and all that costs money. And oftentimes you're not going to get that other money until you've developed some of these other things. So there are pre-development funds that are needed. Here's the numbers. These are not your numbers. These are just example numbers. I do have a little bit on your numbers as well, but If you were to do a project and the cost of each unit was $300,000 and you already had your plans and specs, your environmental, everything already done, it would be a $9 million project for those 30 units. If you were to do a tax credit project, I gotta take a sip, then it's gonna be a little bit more expensive because you have that developer fee that's built in there, plus there are a lot of soft costs. We're gonna have the architect, the environmental, the market studies, application fees, consulting fees, that type of thing. So it does make it a bit more expensive. In our calculation, you always have to take out some ineligible costs. In this case, I just put out $300,000. Ineligible costs are your permanent financing or syndication fees, land costs. There are no land costs in a tribal project because the land will be leased to the partnership. But that equals your basis. And then we take that 130%, that 30% basis boost, that gets it to about 14 million. That is where we calculate our tax credits, the 9% tax credit, and then we get it for 10 years. So we have about 12,600,000. We take the cost from the above, and then we talk about how much the investor is willing to pay. I put in 76 for just the example. So they would be paying about $9.5 million. If we had other gap funding, we could also throw that in there. We don't need it for this example. But the tribal contribution is $1,491,000 in this case, which is the difference between the 11 and the 9.5. And then you would get the developer's fee. The 15% would be $1,350,000. So the final cost for this example would be $141,000 or $4,700 a unit. Again, this is just an example because my next few slides are how did the money really work? And in some cases, we have, like the one I talked about in Washington, we had everything to where when we got to that equals tribal contribution number, that was a zero, and their developer fee came and went in their pocket.
Which one was that?
Port Gamble. Yeah, they just opened up their second tax credit project. They have 50% on the homeless, and they do some apartments for that, and then they had single family for the some elders and others. So it's a pretty cool project. I should have put some pictures in here. I finally got some good pictures of stuff. Usually it's all grainy and from like a work in place inspection or something, but I've actually got some good pictures of that. So anyhow, that's why people do use this tax credit program. It is the single largest program for affordable housing nowadays in the last 30 years. But how do the numbers really work? There's so many different components based on so many different things. If you're doing new construction, what are your infrastructure requirements? If the infrastructure is already there, you're doing an infill project, that's going to be a little bit less expensive. Rehabilitation, we're seeing nowadays about $150,000 on each unit for rehab. That's still less expensive than building a new project. MISHDA, State Allocating Agency, will have certain threshold items and scoring items. Could be something around energy efficiency or electric car charging stations, stuff like that that you might not have thought about putting in your project, but you want to get a couple points so you can beat out that for-profit guy. And so that costs a little bit extra money. Your total development cost caps, each state's different as to how they look at those things, or credit caps. In Michigan, you have credit caps for scoring. If you're in between certain credit caps, then you get 0 points. If you're better than those caps, you start getting up to 5 points, and if you're higher than those caps, you can get up to -5 points. So we would need to make sure that we are balancing our scoring with our ability to get the funding. And it really just depends, because if we're able to get this continuum of care money, then we can be more aggressive on the scoring. If we're not able to get the continuum of care money, then we want to be less, we want to get more credits and be less aggressive on the scoring. At the end of the day, we need to score high enough to where we get the project, though, so it's a bit of a balancing act. The investor also is going to determine how the numbers work, because depending on where your project's located, that could mean the difference between an economic investor, which would be like an insurance company, versus a Community Reinvestment Act investor, which would mean a bank. Banks always pay more than insurance companies. And then the market, we talked about how the uncertainty in the market right now is impacting price. Your construction and lease-up schedule, if you're able to build it faster and put people in the units faster, you're going to get more money than if you're building it slower. You do have a certain amount of time to get it done, but the investor is going to price it based on what schedule you think you're going to make. And the faster your schedule is, the better the price will be. And then when they're putting their money in, some investors will pay a little bit more if you can get a construction loan and you don't need their money until stabilization. But oftentimes, when you compare that to the amount that you're putting in interest, you're better off just getting the money during construction and avoiding the loan. It just really depends. You have to check out all the scenarios. And then, again, the construction side of things, project location, how far are you from the concrete plant? You know, where's lumber coming from? That's different for every tribe, depending on where they're located. The market for contractors.
Can I pause you for a second? We have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, so we've been denied a couple times because of arbitrary criteria the state uses for walkability. Did they ever fix that?
Mm-hmm.
So are they still using like a company that has that information, but they're populating it with our information, or how did they fix it?
So they've just now fixed it. So as Bridget was talking about that toolkit that we've been doing all year, we've been pounding our fists and yelling and, you know, whatever we had to do. And we've been doing this actually for quite some time because tribes have not been competitive because of those reasons. And just this last QAP that just came out has so many different changes. They don't have walkability anymore. They do have distance to amenities, but they've increased the rural side of things a little bit, and they've also recognized that tribal amenities may be a little bit different. So, you know, they talk about daycare. Well, daycare might look like, you know, so-and-so's daycare within a mile of the site. But for tribal communities, sometimes daycare is the Head Start facility or some other type of program, or maybe it's somebody's house that people are taking their kids to. So they are going to leave it up to the tribe to define some of those services and amenities as well, to where.
So we get to define that? It's not going to be evaluated by a external third party?
Right.
Okay, because that was a big problem.
Yeah.
And what they thought they were doing, I don't know if they really thought they were doing something good, but they did 2 set-asides, but there's 12 tribes. So if you have 2 set-asides and you rotate them, you got to wait 12 years to come back around to your turn.
Have you been to one of my sessions before? You sound just like me.
We fought this for many, many years, and I mean, we even had, like, the acting director was very supportive, but it was a tough nut to crack because there's all kinds of politics and constituencies that are hidden. But if they got rid of that, that does put us in, that equalizes actually we have an advantage now with our tax credit, so.
Yeah, our hope is that, you know, there were a few things that weren't worded as strongly after the fact that I would have liked to have seen, but it's a big change, and I think it's going to be fine. the two tribe set-asides just came about. It used to just be one, and most of the time, the tribal projects were struggling because like last year, there were 16 projects in the tribal set-aside, and they were all from the same tribe, except for it wasn't the tribe that was applying, it was a for-profit or nonprofit developer that was applying and put the name of the tribe on there, and the tribe got a little something for it, but it wasn't their project.
Was it Durham?
No, it was Little, I want to say Little
River.
Little River?
Little River, I think, or Little Travers, one of the littles. And it wasn't, at the end of the day, I think that's fine, like you guys did something similar with the Garfield project, but you have more of a stake in it. In this case, you have 16. In this case, it was just kind of all over the place. And anyhow, so they've defined what a tribe, the tribal set-aside needs to be. The tribe has to have an ownership stake in it. It has to be on tribal land, those types of things, whereas these other ones were just kind of owned by somebody else, and the tribe was, the one group was putting money into it. So we're hoping that the set-aside will be less competitive, because we're hoping that that'll weed out some of those things. And then the scoring side of things, we're hoping has leveled out as well. They're recognizing points for actual NAHASDA units, they're recognizing points for tribal economic development projects for your team, whereas before you could only get 2 points in experience. Everybody else could get 7 points in experience. And then they would also have you partner with somebody, which could be fine if that's what you want to do, but it was almost like you had to do it in order to get the points. So there's been a lot of changes. This will be the first year that these changes have come about. In the last 3 tribal projects I've been involved in, I worked on Grand Traverse with 2 projects and La Vie des Airs with 1 project. None of them were funded out of the tribal set-aside. They were all funded out of what's called the strategic investment category, and those other projects were all funded out of the tribal set-aside. So it'd be interesting to see what happens this go-around.
10 years in the making.
Yeah, I might have known you way back then, man, because you were the first project ever in Mishta that received a tax credit allocation, and that, we can't even remember what year that was. But at that time.
Years ago,
Okay.
about 15 years.
Yeah, and at that time, Mishta was going around to each of the communities, kind of like the toolkit, but it wasn't as organized, and the NAIHC was involved, and I was involved in that, and they made some momentum, and that's when your project got funded way back when, and then nothing happened, and things went back, and then turnover, and things just went back to where you couldn't compete anymore. So you kind of always had to have a voice, even if we're not actively using the programs. And I've seen that in other states too, where we used to be competitive, and now if we wanted to apply, we're going to have to start all over again because nobody's applied for so long. But yes, to answer your question, yes. I think that was a yes.
And just as an aside, just to give credit to, there were 11 tribes represented in this toolkit, and a lot of it was housing professionals from across the state, tribal housing professionals. And so I have to give a lot of credit for all those folks coming together in a room by themselves. Mishta left so that they could kind of all talk and come to some agreement and consensus around what needed to happen with the QAP. So a lot of these housing authority directors kind of gave feedback and so forth. And then that recommendation was moved to the United Tribes of Michigan, where a resolution, as you are probably aware, was signed and sent to the state. So it was a really powerful kind of grassroots educated, day-to-day people who are trying to develop housing, and then, it was really cool how it came about, and
I was president of United Tribes when we passed it.
Yeah.
But what they tried to do initially was the set-asides.
Yeah.
Because it entices you, and they got, a couple of them got the set-asides, and thinking that the situation was resolved, but it wasn't. Because we still can't compete, because the system, it's called tribal critical race theory, it disadvantages tribes, and it was based on our rural locations. But I'm glad they also fixed that, because it definitely had an urban sort of priority rather than rural communities, so.
Yeah.
Good.
One of my favorite states to work in is Washington State, and that's because they don't have a set-aside, but every tribe that applies pretty much gets an award. But they don't apply every year. It's not like the for-profit developers are being, taken out because all these tribes want the money. It's kind of regulated itself to where, you might have 2 tribes apply in 1 year and get the award, and then you might not have anybody apply for a few years, and maybe 3, and it works fine. But the way they have their criteria is that you can either get 10 points for being a tribe, or you can get points for being in a location, near job centers, near this. But at the end of the day, if you're in one of those areas where you're getting these other points, you're only getting 3 points. But if you're a tribe, you're getting 10 points. So we already have a 7-point advantage over everybody else, and everything else is equal. Being able to serve lowest income tenants, being able to serve it for the longest period of time, being able to offer services from the tribe, that's all pretty much equal. It's the location that's not, and the experience that's not. But we can compete all day long there. And then actually, when I first started working with the Grand Traverse tribe, we went to Mishta, and I gave them Washington's phone number. I said, you need to talk to these guys because they know how to do it. And it was still years in the making, because I think it's still been about 4 years since we worked on the
You got
first
about
Grand
8
Traverse.
minutes to wrap it up.
I won't ask any more questions.
Yeah, you're cut off. I'm not
You got the hook?
acknowledging you anymore.
Okay. Okay, I think I'm pretty much done with this. So here's the Mishta. It's probably very small for you, but basically, when we can back into how many credits we can get for this project, if it's 36 units, we're going to be able to get somewhere between 32,000 and 34,000 in credits. So when I look at that, I can pull up another slide, or when we're done here, I can pull up the numbers and show you what that means for Michigan. It doesn't mean you're going to get 80%. It means you're going to get something different because of these caps that we have. Here's the income limits for Chippewa County. These are what we have to abide by. And then there's the rent limits. Rent limits just mean under the tax credit program, you cannot go over those rents. You can certainly be under those rents as long as your project works. And then you'll see the fair market rents. If we're able to get those housing choice vouchers, then it doesn't matter what the tenant pays, you will be able to receive the tenant paid portion plus the voucher portion will equal the fair market rent. So a 2-bedroom would get you $1,023, even if the tenant's only paying $100. So ideally, we're able to get those.
Yeah, and I just did a quick calculation based on the current FMRs. If you were to get the vouchers for all 30, if you were able to obtain vouchers for all 36 of those units, it'd be about $450,000 in operating rental subsidy for the property annually.
And then the continuum of care also gives some money for services, right?
Right, yeah, so we didn't apply for any operating through the continuum of care, but we did apply, we could ask for 20% of that $11 million for services. So there is a budget for services built into the COC Builds grant, and there's some flexibility if we're awarded to adjust that, but to subsidize any of the on-site services.
And so I could go on and on and on with my slides, but I cut it short. So the next steps are to apply for funds. Continuum of Care is this week, and then the MISHDA application is due October 1st. And there are some pre-application items we have to do before August 1st. And then if we still have a funding gap, then we would have the Federal Home Loan Bank System. Depending on where we apply, you can get anywhere from $1 million to $3 million. And that's a grant program with similar requirements as a tax credit program. And then there's Q&A, if you have any questions. If you'd like, I can kind of show you what, and I don't need to if you don't care, but about what the numbers are kind of looking like for this project. And it's very loose because we're still waiting on the final MISHDA publishing. They had some mistakes in some of their forms, and their QAP just came out in like a week ago. So it's not set in stone or anything. It's just kind of a very loose projection. I can show you that.
Starting off with questions, Aaron.
Just a quick comment. If we're looking at the different federal targeted funds for tribes, there's a couple that are proposed to be zeroed out. Community Services Block Grant and Community Development Block Grant reduced. What I would suggest is that we look towards those funding sources that we might have been using for leveraging to close the gap, and then work with the legislative office to encourage them to be pushing to try to retain those funding sources. So,
How long's the land lease for?
50 years.
50 years? But typically, it's going to be done in 15, right?
Yes. So then you would have,
So why wouldn't that land lease be less?
because it has to, when the investors and the attorneys are looking at things, it's got to be for the retention period, and it's also got to match at least the loan period. And so any type of money that comes into you is going to be loaned to the project, and it's typically going to be at least a 30-year loan, so it's got to match that. But then it also has to match that retention period. There's also, to get a little bit in the weeds, they have whether or not things are bona fide debt, and they have these debt tests that they have to look at, and they have to show that it's repayable, because if it's not, then it could be construed as a grant. And if it's a grant, then it comes out of your eligible basis, and if it comes out of your eligible basis, you get less tax credits for it. So, so typically they're doing these debt tests and showing things over a 50-year period. And that's why. But I can tell you in year 15, you have choices. You can either keep the partnership intact. If you keep, there's benefits to doing that, because if you needed to rehab that project later on, then you don't have to requalify all of the tenants in there. But that partnership will no longer have the investor as a limited partner. If you're keeping it intact, you would have the tribe own 100% of the partnership, and it would still be all yours. Or you can dissolve the partnership. If you dissolve the partnership, then of course that land lease can be nullified. All of that's kind of the undoing that happens in year 15. But there will no longer be an outside party involved in the project.
Excuse me. Legally, what do we have to waive?
So what we've seen in most of the partnership agreements is, I'm assuming the housing authority would be the general partner, right? It's a to-be-formed partnership. You have one, we have to look at that. But the housing authority would be the general partner, and there would be mediation, arbitration, enforcement in tribal court. That's again, I've been doing this for a long time. When we first started doing it, it was kind of, this is the way it needs to be done. This is the way you got to do it, do it our way type thing. And then when the investor really wanted to do these types of projects, there was a long collaboration and conversations with lots of tribal attorneys. and it was worked upon to where it would work for both sides, and that's what we've been doing for a long time, is that. Sometimes we work with a tribe that has like their own code. I'm trying to think of what it is, the commercial code or whatever. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, good, because I can't, the name, no, it's not zoning. It's like, yeah, it's more like a legal code. Lawyers? What am I talking about? Anyhow, it's like a commercial code or something. It's not to do with zoning or anything like that. It's just your legal code. And sometimes there may be some tweaks or something that's because you have your own commercial code, that there's tweaks in there. But for the most part, that language is pretty universal on the mediation, arbitration,
So the
enforcement.
developer's fee would be totally unrestricted?
Correct.
What's the return on investment for us?
Yeah, the one that we were looking at, and again, it's very, very preliminary, there's my word, yeah. Let's see if I can find it here. Oops, what do we see? Oh, my inbox. Not that. Hold on a second. I'm a little slow. Here we go. I think it's this one. No, that's my to-do list. Maybe I got rid of it.
Didn't you have like a $1.5 million figure, though, figured out?
Plus the affordable housing for members.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like just over $1 million, but I had not we started strategizing a little bit because this is the first time we've kind of all been brainstorming, and I did not have it at the full 15%. So I think we had about a $16 million project, and I want to say it was kind of like just over $1 million. I don't know where it went. I lost it.
Eh,
15% is the most you can go after. And again, if we're able to, there's also I have to also look at the per project limitation because it's the lesser of 15% or a certain number. But if we're able to get these multiple sources of funds, the goal is to get all of that back in your pocket. There's no guarantee because all sorts of things have to work out, but that's our goal, and we've been able to meet that goal many times over. And if with this continuum of care money, that's a gigantic pot of money that we've never had available. So I got to believe that if we can get that, we will not only get enough money to cover the project 100%, but ideally fund some kind of extra reserves for operations or prepay some funds. Like sometimes we're able to, if we have too many sources, you can prepay your replacement reserves for 15 years, or you can prepay certain things to where that becomes a part of your development budget and not your operating budget. That's a good problem to have. But I would imagine you're going to get all of that developer's feedback in your pocket.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, thanks. What's next steps?
Next steps is we submit the COC builds grant tomorrow.
Yep,
Always forget. We submit the COC builds grant tomorrow, and then the low-income housing tax credit application is due early October. So we submit that then. And then we find out like in April, I want to say, or no, before that.
I think around February.
Okay. So we're putting this puzzle together.
awesome, thanks, appreciate it.
There's some preliminary things for the low-income housing tax credit that are due in mid-August, so if anyone wants to give me the contact of who I should work with on the Medicaid piece, That would be helpful.
Reach out to Lana.
I think Joni probably has it too, but
Reach out to Lana so it's coordinated, so
okay.
we all know.
Lana? Okay, sorry.
She's the boss, really. I'm just filling in.
Okay.
And there will be some things that we're going to need signed for the application, but they're kind of, they're not legal documents, they're just preliminary things, like showing that the land's been set aside for the project. There's not a lease requirement, it just shows that we have the ability to get a lease when the time comes. And then there's going to be things such as a loan commitment that we'll have to have signed, and that's basically just saying we're committing to putting these funds there. It doesn't mean that you're going to have to come up with the funds. It means we got to do a lot of work to find those funds. So, but there will be a couple of things that we'll need to make sure that we're able to get signed. There's no, as far as I know, there's no resolution per se required. They can all be in letters.
We also would require resolutions.
Yeah, and the other thing is, any documentation has to be reviewed by our legal team. So the only reason I ask you to go through Lana is it's more board-driven, so people will be forced to answer any questions or act in good faith, so.
Okay. And usually if we do have a resolution, it talks about what we're trying to accomplish, and then there may be some things that have to be signed that are really more just like I said, letters or whatever. After the project is awarded, then we're going to have legal documents that are going to need to be drafted and signed, and that one's going to be real specific about, you know, this document, whereas at the application, we might have something that says, oh, there's no zoning ordinance. We sign and say there's no zoning ordinance. Just little things like that that aren't necessarily legal on that side. But on the other side, there will be, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
I think so. I'll double check. I'm pretty sure I do.
So we'll take 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Josh Elliott. I'm presenting this application for a partial waiver for the purposes of a gaming license on behalf of the prosecutor's office. I'm here with Mr. Peter Sharp. He is requesting a partial waiver for a conviction in 2023 for a criminal trespass in the tribal court. A letter was sent to the tribal court judge and the manager of the casino, and no response was received back from either party. Mr. Sharp meets all the requirements for a partial waiver under Chapter 76, and the prosecutor's office would recommend a waiver be granted for Mr. Sharp, and Mr. Sharp is here to answer any questions you may have for him regarding his conviction and why he's seeking this waiver.
Any questions?
Good to me.
Did you learn your lesson?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Great. We're good, Sean. Josh? That's right?
Yep, I will let him know what to expect going forward.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Peter.
The recording has stopped.